We have unequal income distribution, and the whole point of opportunity zones is meant to try to level that playing field and bring opportunity to some areas that don't have them now. And we'll see if it works. You know, it will provide some folks an opportunity to defer some taxes on some of the gains they have in these areas. And I support it. I think it's a great idea. In fact, there's an event coming up to highlight all of the opportunity zones in Ohio. Is that on the 24th, 29th, 24th? 24th that I'll be participating in, and excited about that to help bring folks from outside Ohio, bring their money into Ohio to actually help our economy. And you know, they buy, obviously, it will help real estate prices, but it'll also help jobs, and that's the whole point of this thing. And to bring income to people who've not had that opportunity, and take some areas that aren't doing as well and try to bring them up. And that's the whole point of opportunity zones. I support it. I think it's going to be a great experiment. We've got a lot of details to work out on them yet, but we're still excited about the opportunity to sort of level the playing field for some people who've had some tough times.
Thank you.
Thank you, Buffy, for moderating, and let me say thank you to all of our friends. And I'm very pleased to acknowledge our County Auditor, Michael Stenziano, who brought greetings and talked about condensing all those forms. So thank you, Michael, for being here. Let me just echo what Steve said as well. And certainly, as you know, there are 44 opportunity zones. And I'm proud to say 34 of those opportunity zones that we have are in my district. And so one of the things we want to make sure, as I asked in our financial services committee last week, opportunity zones was one of the questions that I posed about how do we get out in front of this? How do we make sure, whether it's people in your field, that we're all engaged and know about this, and that there is parity and equity in who's engaged and who's involved. So often when you have things like opportunity zones, there's not an opportunity, no pun intended, for everybody to have equal access and opportunities. I was the first member of Congress to send a letter to our governor, then John Kasich, about opportunity zones, and sent him a layout of all three of our districts. And I carry this, I have this folder from last week in the committee, so I do have a chart of where they are looking at placing the opportunity zones. And one thing I want to do is congratulate you for getting out front with Pat T-Berry, who is the father of this whole concept. And in his new role, we need to make sure that we're all engaged. But I'm all on board with it, been there from the onset, and thank you for being engaged and involved with it.
Good morning, everyone, and Buffy, thank you for moderating this, and thank you to my senior colleagues here that have allowed me to sit on stage with them. But Congressional District, I am the red
There's no hazing, I promise.
Oh, wait a minute. She didn't tell us we couldn't vote. She told you couldn't vote.
Yeah, I'm the redshirt freshman here, so, this is an issue that's very near and dear to my, also, that I will always be involved with. Look, I have even more pressure than Joyce and Steve do. I have the father of this legislation whose district I am now in. So this is something that is very near and dear to Pat, as you all have been said on the stage. Talking about, Pat was here last week. I'm always in communication with Pat about this and getting myself more and more updated as we move along. As Joyce just said, you know, it's been in Financial Services Committee. These two serve on that committee, but they will help me also when need be to further this legislation and to expand on this because it is something that is very beneficial to all of us.
Thank you. Just a really quick follow-up question. Do we have any idea in terms of the details when we're going to have some structural approval around the rules and regulations?
Well, that was the question I asked Mnuchin last week. He did say to us that he thought in the next week we should be getting more information. And so we think that will also be helpful. And let me just say, I just looked out and saw our city councilman, Emmanuel. Thank you for being here. And we're going to make sure that some of those opportunity zones fall within the city. As a matter of fact, within the city of Columbus, 39 opportunity zones are contained within the city of Columbus. And thank you for all of your work.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So let's move over to another area that's had some attention, and I think we've got agreement on both sides that work is needed and necessary: infrastructure. So infrastructure improvements have been shown to enhance property values, create livable communities, and obviously enhance economic viability. The National Association of Realtors supports investing in infrastructure. Specifically, they feel this fund should be set aside in order to maintain our roads and the conditions, but then also to improve and perhaps be futuristic about travel and maintaining, travel and taking things kind of beyond where they are, looking at the future. Would you support infrastructure policies and investments that would allow us to move into the future here in the state of Ohio?
He's on the transportation.
I was gonna say, you got, this is mine. This is my shining moment here. There we go. As they both just said, I am on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. Yes, it is very doable. This is the one committee. When I was looking at committee choices and when opportunities were out there, there were 7 slots available. My team, my staff, we worked very hard on getting on this committee. Congressman Stivers sits on the steering committee. Steve was very helpful to me in also getting on this committee because it's the one committee that I feel that we can all agree in a bipartisan form that we can get something done. And under the leadership of Chairman DeFazio, who's from Oregon, who's very engaged in this process, he wants to get something done too. And I think there's a perfect opportunity with what Ohio has just done in the last 2 weeks by passing the gas tax. I think there's a lot of things that we can do for infrastructure. I think what we're trying to do in the Transportation Committee is expand on it. The gas tax cannot continue to fund our roads and highways and bridges. We must expand off that. And what we're doing in committee right now is having sit-down sessions with panelists from across the country discussing other ways that we can do things to fund transportation and infrastructure, whether it's P3s. We have someone in the specialized communities. I met with an organization yesterday that is very involved in P3s and trying to get some ideas from them with the public-private partnership. But the one thing that we do need to talk about when we talk about infrastructure is broadband. There are broadband issues across the state still today. There are places in the state that have still only dial-up for their broadband. We must continue working on that and including that piece in the infrastructure and transportation issues.
Let me just say the answer for me is yes, and certainly agree with everything that Troy said. Probably the only thing I would add on to it, so often when people talk about our infrastructure legislation, talk about the transportation bill, it has been a bipartisan issue and should be. However, there have been some challenges of recent. I want to be, I'm unfiltered here. The way Troy described it is the way it should happen, and that's what you should remember. But unfortunately, a lot of things have been pushed back. For some reason, we're not getting that traditional bipartisan spirit on needed legislation. But with infrastructure, the only thing I want to add is it is beyond roads and bridges, and we have to remember that. So you're not technically in the road and bridges field, you're in the housing. If I can't get to a neighborhood that I want to buy a house in, I might look somewhere else. So I understand why this is a top issue for you. And he also mentioned communications, the whole broadband issue. many of our issues become problematic within the parties, and it's not always because of partisan politics. Sometimes it's because of geography, where people live, and who's for the broadband or who's not for it, or what cost goes up. But I want to thank you for putting this on your agenda. And also, as you come to Washington and you meet with Democrats and you meet with Republicans, make it very clear where your stance is, because you have one of our larger lobbying groups, and you have so many freshmen and so many people who weren't here in the 115th when we talked about transportation and when we had our CR. And so if you put it to the forefront for you and say, there are a couple things, this being one, flood being another, that it should be a bipartisan vote, and it should be for the whole cycle. We should not be doing this kick the can down the road for a CR that gets us through another 3 months.
I agree with everything that Troy said. I agree with what Joyce said too. The only things I would add are, I think it's really important that we also look at things like broadband. I have a big rural swaths of my district, and there are a lot of places you can't get broadband internet, and it affects the ability to put jobs there. It affects the ability of people's quality of life. It affects education. 1 out of every 4 students that gets a laptop or a laptop or a iPad from their school district can't use it at home because they don't have internet. That's a problem. And so infrastructure should include things like broadband, but we have to do roads and bridges. We also have to look at the next generation stuff you talked about, the future of transportation. Troy and I sat down, and Joyce's staff was there. Joyce was, or you might have been in the meeting, with Virgin Hyperloop, which is a really cool technology. They want to come from Pittsburgh to Chicago, right through Columbus, Ohio, with some next generation, fast, cool stuff. It's not a train, it's a little Hyperloop vehicle, tube, that you travel through. You get to be a little hamster or whatever, and you go really fast. And we've been talking to them about that, and they want to come invest right here. And we need to not just look at the technologies that are here today, but new technologies for transportation, because we have to continue to grow. And a lot of the transportation stuff we have is an improvement, but the same stuff we did at the early 19th century, at the beginning of the 20th century, in the 1900s, when Henry Ford invented the Model T, and when trains were big. But we haven't had new technology in transportation since airplanes, which again was 1910. So it's time to continue that kind of research and development in new ways to move people and things.
Let me just add one thing to that, since both of my colleagues talked about the rural area. Let me just tell you a quick story about inner city. So it's not just rural. There are many inner city homes and public housing venues where those families and children don't have access to having the internet or having cable. A parent came into my office talking about this and said it goes beyond infrastructure. We need to figure out how we make things affordable, how we get the cables and everything changed. But one of the things she said, and I think Steve mentioned education, she said, for example, I have 3 children, and all of their work now goes to look it up on www. or get this resource from there. And she said, we don't have that. So what we do is we get in our car and we drive around until we can find a site like a Panera or like a public library where you can get it on the outside of the building. And so she said at 7 o'clock every evening, we drive around to different places until we can find an unsecure site or get on a site, and she said sometimes in 30 minutes you get caught and it shuts it down, but enough for all of her 3 children at different ages. And keep in mind, they only have one laptop to get on, and the children are not triplets in the same grades. So think about the time it takes for them to get the 3rd grader, the 7th grader, and the junior in high school to be able to do their homework. So this is huge for all 3 of us.
I do want to add one thing. If you all haven't, and we all represent the portion of this is all going to be held in, but Columbus was awarded a smart city, one of the few in this country. And Steve referred back to that. That's part of that Hyperloop. And Joyce and Steve and I are we're meeting with more city. I mean, they're very involved in this process of what the smart city is going to be, and also the partnership. So Columbus is a smart city, and I think that's a huge advantage for us to work off that.
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you for that. Very informative. So Joyce, one of the things you mentioned was the National Flood Insurance Program. And so this program obviously ensures access to property hazard insurance for folks who live in those areas who are unable to obtain private insurance in the private market. So right now there are about 5 million middle-class families and small commercial businesses and 22,000 communities nationwide that rely on this program. Without the insurance, these property owners and these business owners would have to turn to the federal government in the event of a flood for funding in order to rebuild. And during 2018, there were several reiterations of approvals. Some were several months, one was just for 1 week, and currently it's set to expire at the end of May, right? Do you support the continuation of this program, and how can we, get things moving so that this, we can have reform in the House and in the Senate?
I absolutely support the program, and again, this issue comes through the Financial Services Committee. Chairwoman Maxine Waters has been intimately engaged over decades with this. As a matter of fact, her name is in one of the flood.
Bigger Waters and Waters, yep.
Is actually Maxine Waters. Here is another issue, in my opinion, very much like the infrastructure bill. That legislation over the years was bipartisan. We weren't in committee for weeks and weeks and weeks arguing over it. And here again, it's a split. But I'm comfortable saying this split is really not a partisan split. This is definitely where you live. So when you—
How far above sea level you live.
Exactly, there you go. And we have watched the dynamics between those individuals who might live in New Orleans or California or Florida or Texas, a little different than those of us in Ohio. But let me tell you another component, and then I'll let Steve and Troy. Mapping. Mapping is very, very important to this issue. And just as we talked about not having the internet for families and for students, if you're operating off of maps that are a decade or more older, something's wrong with that. And so one of the things in the last Congress that I advocated for and actually went to all of the mapping trainings that were held. So I support it. I support upgrading the mapping, and will be in the majority very encouraging to all of my colleagues to get on the same page with this.
I totally agree with what Joyce just said, and 4 years ago I got an amendment in the last reauthorization that required 3D mapping. They still haven't done that. That would actually dramatically improve the maps because we all know water moves to the lowest point, so a 3D map is a big deal and would really change things for the better. I've almost always voted for every version of the flood insurance renewal we've had, and hope we'll do another one. I think what we can expect is probably in May here, we'll do something that extends it through September, and then in September or thereabouts, we'll do hopefully a 5 to 6 to 7 year extension of flood insurance. But the good news is I don't think anybody thinks there'll be an expiration or a shutdown of the flood insurance program this year. It's pretty bipartisan. What happened in the last Congress was the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, for the first time, who was a Republican, put in a very partisan flood insurance legislation that, frankly, most Democrats couldn't support, and that became a problem, and that's what delayed. We should have renewed this thing last year for a multi-year extension, and it didn't happen. I'm hopeful that we go back to a bipartisan agreement that almost everybody can vote for, something that you know has some reforms. I do think we need to update the mapping. I think that's long-term a game changer for flood insurance, and I think we need to encourage and build capacity in the private market while we keep the government program running and there as a backstop to make sure that everybody can get flood insurance. So that's kind of where I hope we go, and I think we can get there, and I think we'll get there in a bipartisan fashion.
I also supported it, our last vote that we did.